When making accommodations for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing in a classroom, consider his or her specific needs. The following are suggestions and recommendations, but implementation should be decided as a team with the specific child's needs in mind. In order to maximize your time and instruction with a student who is deaf or hard of hearing, it's important to incorporate as many visuals as possible. There are many ways that this can be done in a classroom and throughout the school. One way to include visuals would be to have a visual schedule. A visual schedule would outline the events of the month, week, day, or class using words and picture supports. This type of visual could be very general or specific in order to meet the needs of the student you are supporting. A calendar or planner would be a good place to start. This type of visual would be especially important to notify and document any expected changes in routine. You will also want to keep the age and ability of the student in mind, of course, to be sure that the materials are age appropriate. As a reminder to the student of what is expected, we recommend that you post 3 to 5 positively stated rules in your classroom. These rules should also indicate what you would like the student to do, how you would like them to act or behave. They should not be a list of don'ts. Instead, it's a good idea to pair the inappropriate or the don't behavior with what you want the student to do instead. To allow for you to continuously face the class as a means to maintain optimal classroom management and access to speech reading, there are several assistive technologies that may interest you. Of course, there's the traditional overhead projector, which is still used in classrooms, but there's also a lot of other options. The new format of overhead also allows projection of solid paper documents and 3D objects. LCD projectors are an option, as are smart boards, and these could be helpful if you have access to them. Any type of visual media, such as a clip art, graphics, movies, fogs and clogs, photographs, slideshows, can also be very helpful and useful in order to support your instruction. The more you incorporate visuals, the more accessible the information will be to the students who are deaf and hard of hearing, as well as all of the other students in your classroom. Charts, graphs, maps, webs, and labels are also a nice way to organize information visually. Placing information into this type of format organizes it into chunks. Chunks of information are often more easily remembered. This format is also particularly appealing to visual learners. Using a computer along with programs such as BoardMaker, Word, PowerPoint, and Publisher are also helpful to support or supplement instruction. By using these formats, instruction can be repeated for review for students who are absent, as well can be used by the students who are deaf or hard of hearing in your classroom. Making your message more clear may be possible by using a certified sign language interpreter whose job it is to take verbal language and translate it into a visual one. Even students who are deaf and hard of hearing with little language can greatly benefit from the use of a sign language interpreter. Finally, the more hands-on and kinesthetic classroom activities are, the more engaged and conscientious a student who is deaf and hard of hearing will be. Students who are deaf and hard of hearing often learn from doing or watching a demonstration. As they have limited access to spoken and sign communication, they learn from watching others in their environment. This can be accomplished in the form of experiments, demonstrations, skits, role-playing opportunities, and modeling. When you have a student who is deaf or hard of hearing, it's essential that you are aware of their limitations and necessary accommodations. When beginning a new topic and throughout instruction, be sure to document important terms and concepts onto the board or overhead. Having these prepared ahead of time on a PowerPoint can also save a lot of time. Seating is often a challenge, as the student who is deaf or hard of hearing needs to be in close proximity to the main source of instruction. This may mean that a student who is deaf or hard of hearing has multiple assigned seats throughout the day or needs to be moved more frequently. Students often do not advocate for themselves and will need to be taught and encouraged to do so. If another child in the room poses or answers a question, it is crucial that the teacher repeat it each and every time. This may take up some time during discussions, but the student who has a who is deaf or hard of hearing will miss a great deal of the discussion if this practice is not carried through. Another good idea to do early in the school year is establish a system so that everyone's attention can be quickly and easily obtained. Some teachers use a flashlight method, hand-raising method, or clapping method. Whatever method you decide to use, practice it with the students in a variety of locations and times. Be consistent and use it whenever you need to give instruction or a direction. In the same regard, establish a system to identify who is talking. Some teachers use a talking stick, while others require a raised hand until all eyes are on the speaker. These strategies will help the student who is deaf or hard of hearing follow along with the routine and discussion. Other strategies that will be helpful are to refer to your visual schedule or outline so that the student knows what is going on now and then what is to come. This will help the student stay engaged and on task. Also, introducing and completing organizational tools during instruction will help in the same regard. When presenting information to a classroom with a student who is deaf or hard of hearing, provide a written outline ahead of time that indicates what topics will be discussed and in what order they'll be discussed. This can serve to meet several purposes with one support. First of all, this outline will help the student remain on track. It will also help them limit the topic of discussion in order to utilize a more closed set of possible vocabulary. Finally, this outline will provide the student with cues about when to pay attention and when lecture is coming to an end. Also, during class instruction and discussion, it would be helpful for the student to have a buddy that has been designated to be a note taker for them. It is nearly impossible for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing to listen to a discussion and lecture, speech read, and take notes all at the same time. When trying to attempt this challenge, the student is sure to miss out on essential pieces of information and have incomplete notes. In order to make those pieces of information memorable and accessible, remember to use visual materials and strategies whenever possible. When distributing class and homework, consider individualizing the assignments for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing, just like you would for any other student. This can be done by adjusting the reading level, the length, the amount, due dates, and our topic that they are working on. Students need to be able to demonstrate understanding without being penalized for his or her limited English skills. This does not only mean grammar and structure, but also as simple as their ability to convey their thoughts and messages in written English at all. As in any communication with a student with DHH, be sure to incorporate as many visuals as possible. Do you see a theme yet? I keep saying visual, visual, visuals. Often this occurs by using various forms of technology. Movies, clip art, and PowerPoint presentations are great examples of how this can be done. Your information can be presented and supported with clips and graphics. The instructions can be included and left up for a reminder or to answer questions that may arise. An example could be shown. Any or all of these would be great ideas of ways to use technology to support students who are deaf and hard of hearing in your classroom. In order to be extra confident that a student understands the information and directions, a sign language interpreter may be helpful or even necessary. However, not all students know and use sign language to communicate. In order for a student to be successful on given assignments, projects, or assessments, he or she may need to be explicitly taught study and school skills necessary for that skill set. Whether assessing a student's Chapter 3 math knowledge, Week 7 spelling words, or statewide examinations, there are accommodations that should be considered. The individual student's needs will determine which, if any, of the adjustments are necessary. Some students will require a specific guide for studying the materials prior to testing. This type of study guide may be a list of terms, concepts, or general guidelines for studying. It may even be necessary to provide opportunity for a practice or mock test to be sure that the individual student has the skills necessary to take this type of test, or even to predict if he or she is ready to be tested on the material. Due to the limited English proficiency of many students who are deaf and hard of hearing, extended test-taking time is definitely and should be granted. This allows time for the student to carefully read each question, and the options for responding. Extra time will also provide for an interpreter to translate the written test into sign language, and that is an accommodation that is believed to be appropriate. As English can be a challenge to a student, they may not be aware of the question that is being asked or be able to express him or herself adequately in written English form. So prior to beginning the testing session, it's suggested that the teacher read through the directions and explain what type of skill is being assessed and the type of response that is supposed to be elicited by the student. If this is a classroom-based assessment and you're seeking to measure skill development, sometimes a better gauge can be obtained if choices or picture cues are provided. During testing times, make the environment conducive to focus and thought. Attempt to limit visual and auditory distractions by closing the door, shutting windows, separating seating clusters. As assessment is meant to measure acquisition of skills, perhaps open a book or open note tests may at times be appropriate. Just because a student is allowed to engage with these accommodations doesn't mean the entire class needs to be allowed them as well. These are individual accommodations that can be applied to the group as a whole, but do not need to be in order to be successful. Other ways to individualize a testing situation for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing that will draw less attention may be to alter the format of the test. If other students are taking a short answer and essay test, perhaps a student who is deaf or hard of hearing may be more appropriately served to take a true or false and multiple choice test with fewer short answer questions and no essay. Or maybe you even consider giving the student who is deaf or hard of hearing more frequent and shorter assessments instead of one lengthy one. This will provide the student with more time to grasp necessary concepts and build upon that which he or she has learned without needing to apply all of the skills at once. This is important as many of the terminology and concepts may be new and easily confused by someone just being introduced to them. Group work is important for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing and hearing students alike. Especially when the two are mixed in the same classroom, it provides opportunity for the two to learn how to interact with one another successfully and appropriately. However, it can also be a great challenge as well, especially in the beginning, and if the two parties have not been adequately prepared for such engagement. It is essential that the teacher informs both parties of some coping strategies and expected behaviors. It's even helpful if some role play and assistance is available at first. Students who are deaf and hard of hearing seem to be most successful in groups of 2 to 4 and when written directions and expectations are available. It may also be helpful for the group with the student who is deaf or hard of hearing to be in a quiet location in the room or even move to a hallway or library. Homework is a touchy subject in many circles of people. However, many teachers believe homework to be an integral part of school, learning, and developing responsibility. When providing homework to students who are deaf and hard of hearing, be aware that many of them do not have people at home who can communicate very effectively with them. Therefore, there is no one who can help them complete the assignment or even explain what the student is supposed to do for the task. With this in mind, try to allow the student who is deaf or hard of hearing alternate means of homework that may be more accessible for them. For a written assignment, consider if the student could video or audio tape himself, draw a picture, create a comic, or some other type of hands-on demonstration, building, or project. Whatever the assignment is, be sure that the student has written directions with examples whenever possible. For long-term projects, it is important that the student be given reminders about due dates by putting the information in his or her planner, writing it on the board, placing it on a calendar. Allowing time in school for the student to get started can also help to ensure that he or she understands what's expected of the assignment. Whatever the assignment is, it's important to expect quality work and not just a large quantity. In case the student still has questions once at home, a study buddy or a friend to contact about homework is also helpful. Students rarely use the telephone, so a buddy who understands how to use Relay or has email may be sought after for the student to help support the student who is deaf or hard of hearing. Determining grades for a student should be based on the modified standards specific to that student. By this I mean the grades should reflect the IEP and its objectives. A student who is deaf or hard of hearing skills will be documented at a certain level with a goal indicating the expected effort or improvement that is seen by the end of the year. These are specific skills that are to be acquired or mastered. When assessing a student, be sure that you aim to measure and assess your IEP goals. That's the law. It is also by these standards that the student should receive his or her grades. If you're assessing a subject that is not included in the IEP, just be cautious to apply any necessary skills that are necessary to complete the task that are covered by the IEP. One example of this is central to a DHH student's education, that his or her grades are not based on English skills such as grammar and spelling unless that is the specific skill being targeted. Communication with home is just as important with the student who is deaf or hard of hearing as it is with any other student in your class. And we've talked a lot about communication with families over the course of the semester. Remember, some students or their parents require more communication than others. There are many forms that this communication can take. As I'm sure you're aware, several means of homeschool communication could include email, notes back and forth, checklists, phone calls, logging in a journal, or a newsletter. Remember to communicate with parents when their child is successful as well as challenging. This will help establish a good rapport, and a good rapport can go a long way. When communicating with parents, it's helpful to inquire about how and when is best to reach them. Of course, don't forget to include the parent of a student who is deaf or hard of hearing in traditional types of communication. Parent-teacher conferences and meetings, as well as progress reports, can be a very powerful tool to discuss students' strengths and challenges. Other ways to keep parents informed of their child's progress in education is by sending home an assignment schedule or agenda of each class. In this age of technology, there are also several online resources that can be tapped into to facilitate homeschool communication, such as online grade books, syllabuses, and websites. These are quick and easy ways to keep parents and students informed and involved. So, while we wrap this up, visuals. Use them, love them, as much as and as often as you can. Use them to support and allow them to permeate your instruction and when you support students. Be sure to follow any accommodations that are listed in the student's IEP. I hope that you walk away with ideas that will help you better support students who are deaf and hard of hearing.